Hi, I'm Benjamin Schmitt, and I'm going to read my poem Spider. Crossing a river in Africa, the spider, shooting her blacksmith's thread of melted down swords and armor, the world's molten madness bridging, dangling over the water. The creature moves frantically, and to an observer miraculously, like some stressed out downtown commuter levitating to work. Surely this is a phantasmagorical outpouring of mighty engineering, golden gate sprung from a thimble that you would never believe if it hadn't bored you in second grade, like the kindness of Jesus Christ. When we wake up, we must scrub our knowledge with wonder every day. We must become stupidly smart, reciting information about toenails, excited that they actually exist. See how the web spans the breadth of the river, sparkling in the sunlight, like the grid of a future city. This great cathedral of feasting towers above the current. The spider has toiled on her masterpiece, intricate painting for the dead to be held. The bugs writhe in the snare. The spider climbs to wrap each of them in the gloom of grace and light. Yeah, usually it starts with an obsession, to be honest with you. Usually it's an obsession I have with a visual image. But in some case, and it doesn't necessarily have to be anything particularly unique or even particularly beautiful. It could be a cigarette butt lying on the sidewalk, but it'll just kind of stand out to me for some reason, and I'll just find myself thinking about it all the time, and I'll have to write about it. Other times, it could just be a thought. Maybe there's like some connection I make, between, myself and someone else, or myself and society as a whole, or whatever. And so that's another time I get obsessed with that thought. Like, what does that mean? And I try to really extrapolate on that. And other times it could be a feeling, an emotion. Maybe something painful happened, and I'm trying to get over that. And so it's an obsession in the way that I'm really trying to figure out, like, how can I get past this? How can I maybe even heal a little bit from the process? Not that I think poetry should be, substituted for therapy, but I think it can be therapeutic in a way to write about things that are painful. I think can be helpful. Yeah, this one, it's kind of going off the last question. It really kind of had two sources. Number one, I was just up late one night watching a nature documentary, and there was this whole thing on the spider. And that was much of the poem was just kind of me responding to this really interesting documentary. But then also, at that point, my daughter was, probably, I think, about to turn 3 at the time. And so at that age, children, at least my son and my daughter, they really start to ask questions about the world around them, and there's a sense of wonder that they have. And so it's really interesting to be around children at that age, because you start to look at things differently, and they ask you all these questions, and sometimes you can't even answer the question, and so you might share a little bit of the wonder too. It's an interesting connection there. And so part of it, the poem was about the spider, but that was for me, I found an interesting way to kind of grapple with some other questions I had. Namely, what does it look like to be an adult with a sense of wonder, and not to be naive either. To have kind of an understanding of the world, and even how cool the world can be, but also be mesmerized by its beauty still. Yeah, I'll answer the second part first. this is not written in a poetic form. It's not a sonnet. It's not a sestina. It doesn't. It's not a formal poem in that way. The poem does have its own form. If you notice it, it does. The first stanza has 5 lines in it. The second has 10, and then the third stanza has 5, and then it goes back to 10 for the last stanza. So it has its own structure. And but when I originally composed it, I never put in stanzas when I'm for a rough draft. That's usually it's just I just kind of regurgitating things on the page. So it's just kind of spilling out on the page, and it's not really. It doesn't really have a set structure yet. It's just a series of lines and kind of thoughts and everything like that. But later on, that's when I think you kind of find the shape of the poem. And so this one, I liked the idea. It's very much written in free verse. There's no punctuation in it at all. And so I like that idea of keeping it a free verse poem, but also having a structure to that free verse poem, and also have a little bit of rhyme. There's traces of rhyme in it. There's alliteration in it, and so using some of those rhythms in there, and so having kind of that free verse pushing up against a form in a way, I find that's an interesting tension. So that was kind of the process of how this one came about. It was creating that tension. Yeah, I think for me, there's really kind of a before and after of in my as far as my writing goes, and that's really when I started to edit poems. So it's like before it was a totally different thing. I was just kind of writing on the page, and it was very much like teenage angst-ridden poetry, and but then when I started to edit, I really was able to unlock the shape of what the poem actually was. And so I think for me, when you're writing the rough draft, that's really just you trying to figure out what you're trying to say. And I think when you're editing, that's when the poem is telling you what it wants to say. And so the editing process to me is listening. And so this poem in particular, it had a structure to it, and I had to kind of listen to the poem to find that. And so I would say editing is very important. I think, obviously when you have the rough draft, that's when you're really coming up with ideas, and you're trailblazing, and you're discovering things, and you're innovating, and that's really important. But I would say that editing is equally important in writing poetry, just so that you can discover all the hidden secrets within the poem, and so the poem can kind of speak to you about what it wants to be. Yeah, I think, most importantly, you have to read poetry different than you read a lot of prose. That's different than you would read a book of nonfiction. And so, first of all, that just requires, for many poems, multiple readings, right? If you're reading an essay, you're done with a page. Usually, you're turning to the next page. And especially if you're reading a very suspenseful novel, you're just going to keep turning the pages because you want to figure out, what's going to happen next. But in a poem, you're gonna have to read that page a few times. In fact, you might even have to read a line a few times. It might break down to that because poems are so condensed. Lyric poems are so condensed that you have so many meanings in a single line, maybe even in a single word, that it takes a little bit more patience, I think, than an essay. But I think there's more of a reward. There's more of an experience there, and so if you're reading an essay about turtles, it's gonna be different than reading a poem about turtles. Because if you're reading an essay about poems, or if you're reading an essay about turtles, you're just trying to figure out, some facts about turtles, and you're just trying to learn more. With a poem, you're really trying to figure out, okay, what is, you're going to find information about turtles in it, but you're also going to find out maybe that turtle's connection to you. Maybe that turtle has a connection to another place, or even your place. And so you're kind of building those connections, and you're also at the same time experiencing these feelings. You're experiencing feelings of it inside the poem. There's rhythms inside the poem. There's imagery inside the poem that are pleasurable to experience. And so you have all these kind of multiple meanings coming at you. So it does require multiple readings. And also the beautiful thing of that is everyone's going to read a poem in a slightly different way, and that's definitely okay. Yeah, I actually was thinking of this book by Galway Kinnell. He was a great poet, died a few years back. He wrote a great book in the 1970s called The Book of Nightmares. And it was written, he was someone, he took part in the civil rights movement, and so there's a lot of that in there. It's also written during Vietnam, so he's kind of talking about that, all the stuff going on in the United States at the time. He's also a new father, and so I think I might have connected to the poem in that way because I have a couple of very young children, and so, he's kind of grappling with all these things going on while raising children. But my favorite part of it actually is a poem called "The Shoes of Wandering," and I really love this part of the book because he basically just takes these shoes that he bought at a Salvation Army. He just bought these shoes used from a thrift store, but he really explores the shoes in a whole new way, and he gets you to look at shoes differently. Number one, he's talking about who the previous owners of the shoes could have been. So you're thinking about, who these shoes belong to. He's also kind of discussing how important shoes are in society. And then all these shoes are kind of awakening memories up in his own life. And so I think, he really does something in that poem that I respect a lot from poets, is that you can kind of take something ordinary and make it totally unique and make us look at it in a whole new light. And his language is just really beautiful. It really pulls you in, and it can be gut-wrenching at times, the vibrancy of his language. So yeah, I would definitely check out Galway Kinnell. Yeah, well, I have a book coming out actually. My next book is going to be called The Saints of Capitalism, and it's going to be released by New Meridian Arts. I don't have a release date yet because it's, we're still trying to figure all that out. But this poem will be included in that collection. So if you go to my website, benjaminschmittpoetry.com, you should be able to see updates on it.